Could this manga already be finished? Galaxias is a new manga from Kodansha that's already being praised as the next One Piece. But after just 20 chapters, the manga's already been moved from Weekly Shonen Magazine to Magazine Pocket, Kodansha's online publication. This means that the series has gone from a weekly print to a bi-weekly online-only release. So the question everyone wants to know is, will this manga blow up, or has it already peaked? That's why in this video, I'd like to share my first impression of Galaxias, discuss the state of the series and how it stands out from everything else, and explain why this could be one of the top-selling manga in just 2 years. Just be warned that this video may contain some minor spoilers. So first, let's talk about the hype this series is getting, because whether it's on YouTube, Reddit, or Twitter, everyone who reads this series usually compares it either to One Piece or to Fairy Tail, and those are two of the highest-selling manga of all time. So if Galaxias is anything like either of those manga, then it's clearly off to a great start. It certainly feels that way based on the early chapters. Galaxias is a story about Geo and Nereid. Geo is a small town girl that loves to read about the outside world and dreams of going on her own adventures. Her father forbids her from leaving town until one day she randomly meets Nereid. Nereid is one of the dragon folk, a race of humans with tails with the traits of different dragons. In this world, the dragon folk rule with their power, but Nereid can't remember anything about who he was, so he's on a quest to travel the world and find the legendary adventurer Yuri Holst. So the two characters team up for their own adventure as they travel from town to town searching for the lost adventurer. Right away, this story gives off strong One Piece vibes, more notably with Yuri Holst. It's not like One Piece invented this kind of trope, but I mean, come on. Look at this panel right here and tell me that doesn't even remotely remind you of Shanks. Plus, the whole theme of traveling and choosing your own adventure is obviously very One Piece coded. Now, like I said, a lot of people compare Galaxias to Fairy Tail, and I can definitely see why. First of all, the main duo is a boy and a girl, with the girl technically being our protagonist. That's something Mashima did in Rave Master, Fairy Tail, and Eden Zero. Fairy Tail had Dragon Slayers, and Galaxias has Dragon Folk. Although Fairy Tail was obviously a fantasy story, Galaxias is kind of a fantasy, but it's also got guns and technology, so it's also got kind of a steampunk thing going on like One Piece. Honestly, I wouldn't say it's specifically inspired by one series over the other. In fact, you could compare this manga to Hunter x Hunter, Shaman King, or just about any late 90s, early 2000s manga. The simple, stylized world and the sense of adventure and ambition give Galaxias the same sense of charm that you'll find in any of the 2000s classics. At the same time, as I was reading this manga, I was constantly thinking of how different this felt from every other new manga, and part of this was due to this 2000s charm, but another part of it was due to the art style. But real quick before I get into that, make sure to become a channel member if you're enjoying the video. You get exclusive badges and emojis, and you can pick which series I cover next. Now, when I was hearing about Galaxias, the art would always stand out to me, but I never thought anything of it. Like, I could usually recognize that it was Galaxias, but that was it. It wasn't until I started the manga for myself that I really started to vibe with this art style. And there's really 3 reasons for it. First of all, Galaxias is very stylized. Like, you will get realistic scenery and whatnot, but the character designs are very stylized. It might not seem that way at first, but when you actually look at the characters, you can see they consist of a lot of simple shapes. This stands out the most in side profiles, where characters will be drawn with massive noses and jawlines that almost feel non-existent. Personally, I like this kind of art style because, again, this is what you would see in a lot of series like Shaman King and One Piece. A lot of series kind of struggle to balance stylization with realism, but Galaxias leans right into these stylized characters in a way that helps it stand out from a lot of other manga. At the same time, you can also see some crazy looking details in this manga. For example, these 2 characters from chapter 1 don't look anything like the flat profiles you see later on. There's plenty of perspective and shading. The same is true for this panel of Nereid later in the same chapter. This also translates to the action scenes, where you can find great use of perspective and speed lines. In this sense, and I know I'm in the minority here, but I often find myself comparing Galaxias to Gachi Akuta. They're 2 manga that somehow manage to be both both very stylized, yet very realistic at the same time. It's not that much of a stretch considering they're from the same publisher. Plus, it is possible that series creator Ao Hatesaka worked for Kei Urana at some point. But what I really love about the art more than anything else is the paneling. I know it's easy for people to say, wow, look at the paneling, but Galaxias doesn't really get enough praise for its paneling and sequencing. Especially in the more recent chapters, you can see how the manga's simple style is complemented by this amazing use of white space, and techniques that really emphasize the strengths of this medium. I wouldn't place it on the same tier as, say, Chainsaw Man or Witch Hat Atelier, but I would argue Galaxias has some of the best paneling out of any currently running manga. And this is why I was ready to personally endorse this manga after reading all of the new chapters. It's got that 2000s charm that I love, and it's got an art style that clearly distinguishes it from a lot of the newer manga. But unfortunately, as much as I'm already invested in this series, that doesn't mean it's a guaranteed hit. First of all, while I love this manga and really couldn't find any inherent problems, I do have one concern about the story going forward, and that is the fact that it heavily relies on amnesia. Namely the fact that a large part of the story centers around Nereid's amnesia and his quest to find his identity. Historically, this trope is very hit or miss, and it mostly comes down to execution. One recent example would be Big Mom, and most people hated that plotline. Everyone liked having Big Mom and Wano, but most people thought the way she got there was kinda dumb. Another example outside of manga would be Crow in Destiny 2. In that game, Crow was a major villain, but then he's resurrected as one of the good guys without any memory of his past life. That one was much more split, but a lot of people were torn on having a major villain suddenly become one of the good guys. My point is that this trope can either be really, really good or really, really bad. So it's not a problem yet, but I do have that background concern. That being said, for the time being, Galaxias is doing a hell of a job keeping people entertained. Plus, while a large part of the plot relies on this big mystery, it's been revealed to us in pieces, and so far it's been pretty good. So for now, it's not really a problem. Yet, anyway. Another concern people have is the fact that Galaxias switched magazines. It was originally in the weekly Shonen magazine lineup, but just starting in February, it was moved to Magazine Pocket, which is basically Kodansha's Jump Plus. The manga in this lineup don't get released in weekly prints, and are online exclusives until they get print volumes. Part of the problem is that Galaxias went from a weekly schedule to a bi-weekly schedule, and there's a couple of concerns with that one. Mainly, it's that it can be seen as a dialing back, so to speak. For example, this is usually the kind of thing you do to a manga that's kind of wrapping up like they did with Black Clover. So just that has some people worried Galaxias might not last very long. The other issue is that it's no longer getting weekly prints, which might not be a big deal in the West, but in Japan, where everyone still buys the magazines, that might seem like a problem. So the other concern is that if nobody is actually buying anything to read Galaxias, then there's a less likely chance that it'll blow up. Now, while those are legitimate concerns, here's why I think they probably won't be problems. First of all, most people would prefer a bi-weekly release. With the exception of maybe One Piece, one of the most common complaints I've seen for popular series like My Hero Academia is, man, if they only had more time for chapters. So if anything, a bi-weekly release tends to suggest Galaxias will only be that more consistent. And as far as the digital release goes, sure, it might be harder for Galaxias to blow up right away, but this is far from a red flag. Manga is becoming more and more digital, as we can already see with the popularity of Jump Plus. And in the world of Kodansha, they've already seen success with Windbreaker, a series that actually debuted on Magazine Pocket and has already reached over 6 million copies in circulation. Plus, another thing you have to remember is Kodansha is not Shueisha, and they are much less likely to cut a manga just because it's not doing the kind of numbers they were expecting. So given enough time, there's no reason why Galaxias shouldn't get at least those kinds of numbers. In fact, based on my impression of the series, and Windbreaker's success, and the current hype for this manga, here is my expectation for Galaxias. So right now it's got like 20-ish chapters. At this time, it's got a small following in the West, and it's getting more and more popular. Based on the vibes I'm getting from this manga and the already growing fanbase, I would place this manga in the same tier as your Demon Slayers, your Gachi Akutas, whatever. Now typically, these kinds of manga don't truly blow up until at least chapter 70-ish. For example, Dawn to Dawn wasn't really that popular until about volume 8 or so. Jujutsu Kaisen really didn't blow up until right before Shibuya, so maybe volume 8 or 9. Kagurabachi is kind of an exception, but I also don't think it's hit the true height of its popularity yet, and it's just about 70 chapters. So in the context of Galaxias, it's got roughly 20 chapters. So on a bi-weekly schedule, that means it's going to be around 60 chapters starting in 2026. In other words, I would argue that by the late summer of 2026, Galaxias will be the next windbreaker in the sense that it's going to be one of these online Kodansha manga that see a crazy amount of popularity. And this is for the reasons that I mentioned before. It's got the heart and personality of all of the best 2000s manga like One Piece and Fairy Tail. The art is super stylized, yet stands out from everything else. Plus, I really like the duo of Gio and Nereid. The fact that you have Gio as the sort of lead character takes what would normally be just another meathead action series, and only adds to the sense that this story isn't like any other ongoing manga. So for those reasons, and a bunch more, I have to fully endorse Galaxias. It's a great manga right now, and by 2027, it's going to be one of the very best manga. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you describe Galaxias? What are your predictions for this series? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And don't forget to become a channel member. You get exclusive badges and emojis, you can pick which series I cover next, and you can get your name in future videos. Also check out my other manga recommendations, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.